Hello there, everyone. This is Dale from the Precept classes in Cullman, Alabama, and I thank you for joining with us in our new study. We've been studying Revelation now for quite a period of time, a little more than a year, and so now we're going to be studying the book of Joshua. Now, the book of Joshua, as far as lessons, is relatively short. I believe it's 7 or 8 lessons. And sometimes when you go to the Old Testament, people wonder, and they say, well, is there anything really here for a New Testament believer today? I think you will be amazed at what all we find. In this week's lesson, there were 2 basic things that you examined. And so remember that these video times are just times to supplement the time you've already studied. I really do them for folks who are out of town for various reasons. Okay, they're on vacation, or for some reason they were unable to participate or attend this week's class time. And so I do these little videos just sort of to catch them up and let us know where we're going. So make sure you do your homework. You can order the Precept workbooks yourself. Just go to precept.org and you'll find all sorts of resources. We do the series called Precept Upon Precept, which is the most in-depth study. And so this is lesson 1 of Joshua, and this week you look at 2 basic things. We looked at chapter 1 of Joshua to see what the Lord told us about Joshua and what he said to him. And then we did a lot of cross-references dealing with the land. And when you looked at these cross-references in Genesis 12, Genesis 13, Genesis 15, Genesis 17, several cross-references, we find out that God had given the land to his people. He gave it to Abraham, and it was part of the covenant promise. He said, I'm going to do some things here for you. I'm going to make you a great nation, and I'm going to give you a land. And then he re-emphasized that covenant to each generation. We see it in Exodus, we see it in Leviticus. And what we're going to see in Joshua is that the children of Israel are finally moving and under the behest of the Lord and the leadership of the Lord with Joshua. And they're going to be taking the land. They're going to be taking the land that the Lord promised literally hundreds of years before. So throughout our study in these next few weeks, make sure you pay attention when you see the word land appear. Now about Joshua, what we found out about him in our study and in the cross-references, that he had been a leader of Israel's army. He had won a battle over the Amalek. He was Moses' servant, even from a youth. He was attendant from the youth. He was the son of Nun from the tribe of Ephraim. You actually found that his name was Hoshea, but Moses called him Joshua. Joshua was one of the 12 spies that were sent out to spy out the land. Only Joshua and Caleb came back with a positive report. They came back and said, we can take this, we can take this. The other ones did not have the positive report. Because of that report and the fact that the nation of Israel believed the report of the majority of the committee rather than the word of the Lord, that is the reason they wandered in the promised land until that generation died off. So Joshua and Caleb were the only ones who were over the age of 20 who actually entered into the promised land. Joshua was described as following the Lord fully. Now that's interesting, because we're going to see later on there's going to be times when Joshua wasn't perfect. Okay, it wasn't mean that he was perfect in every way, but he followed the Lord fully. So in Joshua chapter 1, you see that the Lord was speaking to Joshua in the same way that he spoke to Moses, and he told him certain things that were going to happen. Primary among everything that he said in this first chapter was he told him to be strong and very courageous. God told Joshua, be strong and very courageous. Be very strong and very courageous. Now, this sort of begs the question, why would God have to tell him that? Well, I believe it was because perhaps Joshua needed to understand that he needed to be strong, and there was going to be times that fear might come, or apprehension might come, but he needed to be strong in the Lord. Also, the Lord told him that no man would be able to stand before him. Okay, he told him, you're going to be victorious, but you need to be strong and very courageous. So God repeats that to him 3 separate times. When you get to the end of the first chapter, Joshua comes back and he addresses the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. These are the tribes that Moses had given land east of the Jordan River. This wasn't part of the initial land that God had promised to Abraham. But when these tribes saw this land, they were herders, and they said, hey, Moses, can we have this? And Moses went before the Lord, apparently, and he said, okay, here's what you can do. You can take this land, and you can have this land, but you have to enter in with your brethren. When we cross the Jordan, you have to go fight for us. You just can't say, okay, we've gotten this far, y'all go ahead, and we're not going to fight. And so that's what Joshua was doing at the end of this first chapter. He's coming back, and he's reminding them that yes, they possess that land in the east, but they must go with them. And what's really amazing, if you read what's going on in this last part of the first chapter, these tribes come back and say, yeah, man, we're affirming exactly what you said. We remember what we promised to Moses, and we're going to do this. And then the leadership of these tribes look at Joshua and say, you only be strong and very courageous. I think that's sort of funny. They're telling him, yes, we're going to do what we promised to do and what we promised before Moses and promised before God, but we want you to do what you're supposed to do, which is to be strong and very courageous. I don't know if this is a word that came through them to Joshua, which was a point of confirmation or affirmation of what God had said, or if Joshua had told them that God has told me to do this, or what it is. Either way, we see that 3 times the Lord told Joshua to be strong and very courageous, and now the people are reminding him, you be strong and you be very courageous. So here, the 2 big things that you see this week's lesson related to the land, that the Lord called Abraham to this land, and he promised this land to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants forever. It's God's land. It's not really the people's land. We also saw in our homework that God said, I will drive out the inhabitants. He said, I'll do it in a timely way to where you won't be overwhelmed. And that God told him that Joshua is going to give Israel the possession of this land. What do we learn about Joshua? That he's a leader. That he's Moses' servant, he's one of the 12 spies, that he followed the Lord fully, that he was commissioned by Moses, by the Lord, before Israel to lead in the land, and that he was going to be required to be strong and very courageous. Later on, you're going to find out and see that several times the Lord tells him, don't fear, fear not. And so I believe that's the word for us today, to realize that the Lord has given us a land. He's given us possession as believers. We are to be strong and very courageous in the Lord, and we are not to fear. Again, I'm Dale from the Precept classes in Cullman, Alabama, and I thank you for being with us. And I'll see you again next time. Goodbye.